What about second breakfast?
Time for second breakfast.
What's up, everybody? Monster from Breakdowns for Breakfast here with another second breakfast. If you listened to our episode earlier this week, you heard me and Danger and our good friend Daniel Terry having a fun conversation about the band Zao. And while discussing Zao, we brought up Cornerstone Festival. Now, to the three of us, Cornerstone is just the most household name when it comes to music festivals back from when we were growing up. But maybe that's not the case anymore because it hasn't been around for the past few years. And so what I wanted to do was do a little bit of a history lesson on the Cornerstone Christian Music Festival. If you've heard of it, if you've been there before, then you'll know what I'm talking about. This was, especially in the late 90s and early 2000s, it was almost like the Christian Warped Tour. You had a ton of screamo metalcore bands that played this all, every year. But that wasn't always the case. Matter of fact, it started much differently, and it was actually a little bit more diverse than I even realized. I think because of the bands that I knew that were playing this festival, I just assumed the whole festival was that way, but it really wasn't. It was actually a pretty unique mix of heavy stuff, but also more contemporary and worship kind of stuff. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the history of Cornerstone Festival, kind of what happened with it, and then also kind of where we are now in 2026 and would something like this work? And I've got some thoughts. So anyway, so the Cornerstone Festival was a Christian music festival that was put on by a company called Jesus People USA. It was usually around the July 4th time, and it was in Bushnell, Illinois first, and then it moved to another place, still in Illinois. I think it was like a half a mile, 1 mile apart, so it was pretty close. Now, Jesus People USA is kind of fun because my wife and I used to go to a church that was a vineyard denomination, and the vineyard sort of came out of the kind of hippie Jesus movement of the 60s and 70s, and that was also where Jesus People USA kind of came from. I think sort of it was sort of this hippie movement that was taking place all across the country, and the vineyard part was a little bit more West Coast, and then this seemed to be a movement that was mostly in the Illinois area. The part about this that's important to not only Cornerstone but to Christian music in general is this is sort of the beginning of when Christian music began to sound like secular music. Late 60s, early 70s is the time when a lot of these artists started to, put it this way, Christian music started to sound less like hymns and organs and a little bit more like what you heard on the radio, just with, Christian lyrics. And so what was interesting, I didn't know this before, was that Cornerstone Festival was a member of this organization called the Christian Festival Association. Now, this organization is still around, and some of the festivals that they put on are not that dissimilar to what Cornerstone was. The biggest difference, though, being that they are a little bit more I don't want to say contemporary, but the heaviest you're going to get is somebody like a Skillet, maybe Red, maybe POD, but even that's more like they're not big enough to like headline a big stage anymore or anything like that. But the thing that made Cornerstone so unique was that they had multiple stages that were actually like different styles. They were put on by different, magazines or organizations. Each stage was sponsored, just like, every festival is today. But you would have, a more contemporary stage, then you'd have a more extreme stage. And because like a lot of these stages now, it doesn't matter. It's just that's where the bands are playing. These festivals we have now, like Aftershock and Incarceration and stuff, It's 4 stages, 4 days, 12, 16 stages, 200 bands. It just goes on and on and on and on and on. And while, yes, obviously there's going to be diversity in that, it's still going to be rock and metal. Whereas like with this Cornerstone, and then also some of these other festivals, specifically with this Christian Festival Association, a couple I recognize was Uprise Festival in Pennsylvania and the Sunrise, yes, that is SON, Rise Music Festival in Virginia. But these are going to be predominantly this, again, kind of the same genre. You're going to have some variation. You'll probably have like some hip hop artists, but you're going to have a lot of just CCM, contemporary Christian kind of stuff. And then usually you got like one or two harder rock metal bands thrown in there. Another good example of this is Winter Jam, which is it's a touring thing. It's not just like a weekend or whatever. But they always usually have like 4 or 5 sort of contemporary Christian artists, but then you've got like 1 or 2 sort of on the outskirts. You got a hip hop artist, or you got a band like a Skillet, or I think this past year I think Skillet was one of the headliners, and then Disciple was one of the heavier, like earlier bands. Of course, Disciples kind of softened a little bit over the years too, but you get the idea. You know, they do some rock stuff. So the first Cornerstone Festival was actually held in 1984. I had no idea it went that far back. I looked at, and also real quick, like caveat here, I got most of this information from Setlist FM and then a little bit from Wikipedia and a couple of other sources. So I cannot confirm how accurate some of this is. I'm doing my best here. But I looked at the roster for that 1984 Cornerstone, and I was not familiar with much of any of it. I did listen to a few artists. There was a guy named Steve Taylor, a woman named Sheila Walsh. I looked up this one. There was a band called Altar Boys, and I actually kind of dug them. Again, you know, late 70s, early 80s kind of music, but it had just a twinge of punk rock to it. Like you could hear kind of a little bit of the Clash or the Ramones or something in there. It was okay. Now, I don't know for a fact. I couldn't really confirm this, but I also think Phil Keaggy played. Now, Phil Keaggy is an incredible guitar player. He does some records with vocals, and they are Christian, you know, based, but he's one of the best finger picking guitar players of all time. Acoustic stuff. He does some electric stuff too, but his acoustic finger picking stuff is fantastic. I heard a ton of it growing up in my house, and I do not know for a fact if he performed at the first one, but he did perform at multiple Cornerstone festivals. But as time would go on, they would start to get a little bit more metal and punk and alternative. And I think you really started to see that in like 1988, because that year, in addition to some of these other artists I mentioned, you also had Petra, Vengeance Rising, Sacred Warrior, and a couple more that were a little bit more like, you know, 80s hard rock and metal. Again, you know, like calling Petra hard rock and metal is a bit of a stretch, but these weren't just like bands you were going to see at church. You know, this was starting to get a little heavier and a little louder, but I think it was really once it got into the 90s that we saw it becoming sort of what, you know, me and Danger and Daniel Terry were kind of more or less kind of referring to. In 1990, was the first year DC Talk performed. And then in 1992, you had DC Talk again, but you also now had the Newsboys, and this was the first appearance of Living Sacrifice. Now, I've talked a lot about Living Sacrifice on the show, big fan. This was that earlier iteration that was a little bit more speed metal, thrash metal. I think they had a different vocalist. This is before they kind of became the Living Sacrifice that, you know, we did their record on the show and everything. And then 1994 is an interesting year because Living Sacrifice is there again, but now you've got POD and Sixpence None the Richer, and for some reason, the Charlie Daniels Band. Now, I'm not real sure why, but cool, why not? Some other notable acts that if you're from this time and you listen to Christian rock and metal, these names will sound familiar. We had bands like MXPX, great punk band, Everyday Life, which was a fun like rap metal band, Audio Adrenaline, Grits, Jars of Clay. As it went on, you got more into like the metalcore stuff, and you started seeing bands like Under Oath and As I Lay Dying. And so that there was, it was, like I said, it was kind of broken down in different stages. So it was kind of cool. You could just go like hang out at the stage that you knew was going to have the bands that you wanted to see, or you could kind of, mingle. They kind of did that a little bit with the Warped Tour when that became cool, but not as, I really like the way they did this, where they kind of broke it down to where, you like, for example, one year at Warped Tour, I was at the main stages. This was early in the morning because the back and forth of the two main stages at Warped Tour, you would have basically one great big stage split down the middle. And so the band on one stage would play 30 minutes while the other one set up. And then as soon as they were done, the next band started. And so it was really cool that this particular date that I went, the first three bands were all bands that I wanted to see. But it went Bullet for My Valentine, Reliant K, and then Atreyu. Now, if you know anything about these bands, Bullet for My Valentine and Atreyu, especially back, this would have been, early 2000s, makes sense. Both of them are like metalcore, a lot of wheedly deedly guitars, a lot of screaming, perfect. Reliant K is a Christian pop punk band. And the fact that they were sandwiched in between those two right next to each other did not do them any favors. Because I happen to like all three, but I was standing in front of the stage with Bullet and Atreyu. While Reliant K was playing, there was a bunch of metalheads over here singing Kumbaya and, Jesus loves you and like really teasing them and stuff. It's like, that's not cool, Warped Tour was very randomized like that. So I kind of get it. That's just how it goes sometimes. And that is, I feel like Warped Tour was a way to actually kind of stumble, across new bands. But I liked how Cornerstone had it a little bit more segmented, where it was like, okay, if you want to hang out over here and see the, contemporary Christian guys, go for it. But if you want to come over here and see the, gnarly metalcore stuff, that's going to be this stage. So now, okay, so the festival ran from 1984 and the last one was in 2012. Now, when we did the episode talking about Zao, Daniel Terry mentioned that they were kind of a staple of the Cornerstone Festival. He was more right than I realized. Zao, and again, this is according to Setlist FM, I could be wrong. But according to Setlist FM, Zao played Cornerstone every year from 1997 to 2006, except for 2005. I don't know why they didn't, but they didn't that year. So they basically played, out of those 9 years, almost 8 years in a row. Which, hey, Cornerstone was a huge festival. I tried to look up the numbers and I couldn't quite see. They said that in the early years, they would have anywhere from like 25 to 30,000 in attendance. And then by 2012 and the 2013, like those last couple years, 2011, 2012, those last couple years, it was more like 4,000. So huge drop off. I didn't look necessarily too closely to see the caliber of bands, but that leads me to this last question. Could something like Cornerstone Festival be successful today? And here's the thing. When me and Danger and Daniel Terry, we were talking a lot about listening to Christian music in the late 90s, early 2000s. And it was like, Yeah, there was a lot of different genres, but you knew them all. Like as we were having that conversation, we were talking about Zayo, we were talking about PAX 217, which, Zayo's, really heavy metalcore, flirts with death metal and black metal and stuff. PAX 217 sounds like 311 or Sublime. And then you got Skillet, who back in this day would have been rock, but a little bit like almost techno-y, industrial a little bit. And then you got bands like POD and Project 86 and all these bands. And it's like, yes, they're all different, but we sort of knew them all. It kind of goes back to like when we talk about Weird Al, when he did a parody song of a song in the 80s or, 90s, everybody knew the song because everybody was conscious of the same things. Well, music has become so segmented now and so genre like based. It's a little harder to pull this off. Now, I will say, I was in a band called Red Letter Rising, and we played a Christian music festival in Greentown, Indiana, called Kingdom Come Festival. Now, this was a 2-day festival. It had 2 stages, and a handful of bands. But here's the thing about this. There was a couple thousand people there, I would guess. I tried to look it up again. I couldn't find anything. But this was very much, again, there's diversity. There's bands that are a little bit more industrial. There's bands that are a little bit more metal. There's some bands that were, I think there's a couple of hip-hop artists thrown in there. The band I was in at the time, Red Letter Rising, very much old school rapcore, rap rock, new metal kind of stuff, bouncy, chuggy riffs, a lot of rapped vocals. And it's sort of like everything sort of fit that. Like you weren't going to get, Audio Adrenaline wasn't going to show up. Matthew West or any of these kind of artists, Crowder, like you're not going to get that kind of artist at a festival like this. And so could you do a 2-3 day long Christian music festival that would bring in 25, 30,000 people? I don't think so. I just don't. Do I think you can do a weekend with a certain flavor of Christian music and get a few thousand? Yeah, absolutely. I played one just in 2023. And this Kingdom Come Festival happens every year. And it's free. I don't know exactly how they do it. I know that it's at a memorial, a war memorial kind of venue. And we had a great time. We did play at like 11 or 12, on a Saturday, and it was like 90 degrees and there was no shade, but that's cool. Hey, you know what? I've played sweaty shows before. Not a big deal. I don't know that we'll ever see something quite to the level of a Cornerstone. I think it could be done if you had enough artists that were willing to, play ball. Like if you were willing to get like Skillet and Crowder and, my wife is screaming at me because she knows these artists much better than I do. But if you got a couple of those, like almost like household names when it comes to Christian music, and then be willing to have stages that have the more extreme stuff, then maybe. But as it stands right now, I think the best we're going to do is we're going to have those like Kingdom Come Festival, which was great. Don't get me wrong. But the headliners were like Disciple and Convictions and the letter Black or the letter Red or whatever. That's not going to draw 10,000 people. It's just not, but if you were able to have 2 or 3 days and you had a couple of those really big artists and then also some side stages with some metal and stuff, maybe I'd love to see it. I think that, back in the day when we were growing up, we talk about this on episodes, there were Christian music venues everywhere. There was at least a handful, like 2 or 3 kind of scattered about like where we lived. But then there was always 1 or 2 churches that on, couple Saturdays a month, the first Friday of a month, whatever the case may be, would have live music. And there was these kind of bands. It was rock and metal. And yeah, it's sometimes they weren't packed, but there was still, those opportunities. And I'd like to see that again. I think that even if you're not a big fan of like Christian rock or you cringe at that or whatever, I think about my girls, I've got a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old. They like live music. And so for me, it was like my parents knew they could drop me off at some of these venues. Like there was Straight Gate in Lexington. There was Cafe Jam in Greensboro. There was the Fire Escape in, I think, Kernersville or Reedsville. They could drop me off and know I would be fine because there was no alcohol. There was no drugs. It was just young kids listening to Christian rock and metal. And it was fun. And I really do. There is still a few of those places around, and I hope they continue to do well. And yes, so my personal opinion, do I think something on the size of like the old school Cornerstone Festival can happen right now? Probably not. But do I think that there is a market for it if it's done correctly and enough effort and energy is put into it? I could see it happening, and I wouldn't be mad about it. And chances are I would know most of the bands that play it and would try to go. So anyway, what do you think? Did you ever go to Cornerstone Festival? Did you go to any of these other Christian rock metal festivals? I can safely say when I was playing back in the early 2000s, I was in Christian bands and I wanted to play at Cornerstone and we never did. But we had friends who did and that good for them. So, but yeah, what do you think? Is this something you went to? Is this something you'd like to go to? As always, I love to hear back and have conversations. So let me know. And I hope you have a good day.